From the traditional and unceded territory of the Caledonia First Nation and the heart of northern BC, welcome to the CNC podcast. 50 years, 100,000 alumni. At CNC, we're learning together, changing lives and creating futures. Welcome to the CNC podcast. I'm Mark Cargelotto. For this year's International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CNC is focusing on the United Nations theme, and that's Voices for Action Against Racism. That's important for all of us here at the college. We have an active group of educators who are working to understand students' experiences, employees' experiences, and how together we can create a community that actively prevents and deals with incidents of racial discrimination. And today I'm joined by two CNC leaders to talk about the actions that the college is taking to, again, prevent racial discrimination and deal with it when it appears. Dr. Dennis Johnson is the president and CEO of CNC, and Marlene Erickson is the executive director of Aboriginal Education for CNC. And welcome to the CNC podcast.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, Dennis, let's start with you. In your career in post-secondary education, it spanned about 30 years. So can you tell me about how attitudes towards racism have changed along that way through your experience?
Yeah, sure, Mark. Well, frankly, my childhood was in a town where there wasn't an incredible amount of diversity, and I was fairly isolated and on reflection, fairly privileged. It was really once I got into the college system and started to teach and started to learn more about teaching by doing an undergraduate degree in adult education, that I was exposed to issues of racism. Now we're going back 3 decades, and it wasn't as anywhere near on the public consciousness as it is now. It was something back then, I think, that we saw in other countries like South Africa, didn't necessarily recognize in our own backyard. So I've seen over 30 years a growing awareness. It's far more top of mind for administrators like myself, for institutions, for governments. So we've made some progress, but there's still an incredible amount of work to be done, both in the college, post-secondary sector, and society in general.
Marlene, can you talk about those experiences locally in the post-secondary sector? You've been at the college for quite some time, but what do you think are some of those incidents of racism that people have faced?
Well, I think from First Nations perspective, I could say that there are a lot of assumptions about us that still impact student success, that we're not able to succeed in post-secondary, that we have nothing to contribute to any academic dialogue, that we're kind of a broken and dysfunctional people. And I think that was termed the racism of low expectations by the Auditor General of BC. And I think that's something that's worth thinking about, and how that really does impact students when people have that attitude towards them. And from a systemic perspective as a college, we've progressed over the years, as Dennis said, making this a more inclusive space for Indigenous and other marginalized groups. But, there's still a lot of work to be done. We need to look at, for example, the workforce. Does it reflect the diversity of people in this region? We should be always checking, student services and other services that we provide to see if they're, culturally appropriate and respectful of all of the students who come through our doors. So, in other words, really embed changes into the system, right? So they're not subject to the whim of individual attitudes and assumptions. It becomes a way of doing things that is respectful of all the people who walk through the doors of the college.
I have a question that I'd like to ask actually both of you. We'll start with Dennis. Can you please tell me what has been the biggest learning or impact that you have personally experienced about racism in the post-secondary sector or even in society overall?
Well, I think the biggest disappointment has been that it's still as prevalent as it is today. Like I said, I grew up many decades ago, started in the post-secondary sector. And over the years, I have seen improvement, but I've also seen a lot of issues and a lot of problems, which I've been, either directly involved with when there are cases of racism as a manager, or just, observing as a member of society. And, so the biggest thing is that we still have a long ways to go, and the post-secondary sector needs to continue to play a major role in fighting racism.
Marlene, I think you had alluded to several impacts and places where we need to go in one of the last questions that I'd like to ask that I asked you. But I'd like to ask that though again about a significant impact or learning that you've personally experienced that might have influenced how you've worked as a post-secondary leader.
Well, I think I guess I try to remain a hopeful and optimistic position, that a lot of the racism that we experience or witness isn't really sort of a malevolent or intentional act, but it's done by people who just don't know any better. Right. And so that's where, as a college, we can play a really big part, right? Because what we can embed teachings about the, diverse people, into the curriculum. We can, teach the history of marginalized groups. We can integrate social justice issues into the curriculum at every opportunity. And these go a long ways to creating understanding so that, the people who do and say these things don't anymore, because now they know better. And so I think that's really huge for us for us in the post-secondary system. We talk about systemic racism, and that's true of pretty much every system that exists in Canada today. And we train the people who work in those systems, right? Whether it's social workers, teachers, people who work in justice, and on and on. And so, as post-secondary, we should be finding ways to embed that training in the curriculum, right? So that we're not sending people out to work in those systems with not knowing about the people that they will be serving, and having these assumptions about them. So, yeah, I think there's lots that we can do in virtually every program that we have at the college.
Dennis, Marlene touched on many different points there. Would you like to add to that in terms of how does the college set a culture that prevents racism and addresses incidents of racism or addresses systemic racism?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up. So institutions like CNC and many organizations outside of post-secondary certainly have tried to do things like improve policies and response when there is issues of racism brought forward. And certainly we want to make sure that, if there are issues, people feel safe to bring concerns forward. So we need to have our internal processes in order. But the bigger role, which Marlene spoke about quite eloquently, is education. we have an opportunity to not just impact people that are part of CNC, but people that leave CNC, go off into the workforce and continue to help with the conversation. So education is probably the biggest, most powerful tool that organizations like CNC have. And we're certainly dedicated. We have a lot of work to do, but we're dedicated to providing that education, having it woven into many of our programs and readily available to the community. So education is absolutely key to a better, less racist society.
Marlene, can you speak about individual students' experiences and sort of the environment that that individuals need so they can effectively stand up against racism or ensure that they have the support if they encounter it?
Well, I think first and foremost, students need to feel included and safe in this space. And they need to feel confident that they'll be supported in their fight against racism. So as a college, I think we need to be more vocal and more visible that we don't tolerate racism within the college. And I think too, that we could do stuff like, course outlines could include a statement, about that we don't, about cultural safety and respectful dialogue in the classrooms. We could, as Dennis said, we could have policy that, so we start addressing every single incidence of racism so that people grow to understand, that it isn't tolerated in the college and that there will be consequences every single time. And eventually that becomes a culture, right, within the college system. We have lots of professional development opportunities for all the staff at the college. And so, wouldn't it be great if we could require, that at least one of them every year has a focus on anti-racism or learning about the Indigenous and other diverse groups of this region that we serve, right? So, there are lots of ways we can get the message out there. And as I said earlier, it's about embedding it in the system and just, being a way we do things at CNC.
Marlene, can you tell me what gives you promise or hope in addressing racism that impacts the higher learning sector and the college sector?
I think reports such as the one in plain sight done on the healthcare profession that was recently completed by Mary Ellen Tupelafan, which showed the endemic racism within the healthcare system. The one recently done on School District 57, which showed, systemic racism within the school district system. That kind of evidence, right, present us with a really clear path that we can do better as colleges. We need to set that expectation, for all of the students, that when they go out into the world to work within all those systems with healthcare and education and so on, that they will have had some cultural competency training from the college. And I think it's very hopeful, that a couple of weeks ago, the Minister of Education made some Indigenous focused courses mandatory within the K-12 system. So you have to get 4 credits in order to graduate. And so, First Nations leadership immediately pointed out, that those courses will go a long ways to preventing racism against Indigenous people. And so, we can hope, that other ministries will do the same, including post-secondary ministry.
And Dennis, final word to you. What do you think is the biggest challenge that the college or post-secondary sector in general then faces in addressing racism?
as I said earlier, there are challenges still in that it exists, but the other side of it is I've seen an incredible change in the conversation in the last few decades. There is a general willingness. I don't meet many people anymore that want to deny that racism is an issue or suggest that we don't have a role to play, whereas that maybe wasn't the same 20 or 30 years ago. So, on one hand, it exists. It's a huge challenge. On the other hand, the glass is half full as far as society is starting to get there. And, we have an incredibly supportive community within CNC. A lot of people ask, what can I do? I don't understand what my part is, but they're willing to learn. And so that gives me hope for the future. And as Marlene said, we need to continue to provide professional development, education, and awareness. I'd like to make just a final point. This isn't something that's any longer seen as just something management needs to do on an official basis. We need to do the formal work that needs to be done. We also have an incredible community of volunteers working on issues. And so there's more of an organic willingness of people to come together and work towards eliminating racism. There's a committee for equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is a volunteer committee, and they're doing great work, and we want to build on that.
Dennis Johnson, Marlene Erickson, thank you both very much for your time today.